it kind of takes that concept of analytics process automation and takes it to the next level. So if you look on your left, we've got all of these data sources, these data, we'll say applications that you can ingest into the Alteryx platform. You can also run Alteryx in a lot of these actual platforms themselves if you want to keep the data resident to where it lies. But whether it's a PDF document with somebody's resume or an RPA bot or an actual database that tracks military readiness, or a cloud data source that tracks recruiting, or anything that you have on that left-hand side, Alteryx can connect to it, put it into our platform, and then apply these 260 plus automation building blocks to it. So maybe I just want to do some prep and blend to it and then push it to a Tableau dashboard. Or maybe I want to do some predictive analytics, some prescriptive analytics, and then push it into some sort of business-ready doc email system. Or maybe I want to do AI or ML and then create a predictive model and then embed that in some sort of production AI thing. You can absolutely do all of that and more in the Alteryx platform. It's an end-to-end platform that helps automate pretty much everything from source data to wherever the target system is that you would want to do in the analytics space. And as you guys know, the analytics space is a broad space. And I'm sure if you're like every other organization I talk to on a daily basis, you have made investments already into these spaces. For instance, on the operational automation side, you'll see things like data wrangling, right? You'll see things like descriptive analytics. And if you take it to the next step and you start working on strategic automation, you'll see things such as diagnostic and spatial analytics, and then the predictive and prescriptive side of things, scenario modeling. Finally, when you move towards this cross line of business transformation in your organization's analytics process, you'll find things like no-code, low-code data science, predictive auto modeling, and ML in there. That whole end-to-end process, by the way, across all of those 6 columns, makes up this automated analytics process for which Alteryx plays in. But the great news is if you've made investments in one or more of these columns, great, we can absolutely take advantage of that, right? Alteryx is plug in anywhere and get value in where you need it. You can run it as an end-to-end platform, but if you just want it to do one of these 6 columns, we can certainly do that. Some of those investments that you might have made look like this, right? On the operational automation side, there are vendors out there that do a really good job of that, right? If you're looking more for that middle layer of strategic automation, well, there's some vendors you've heard of there that do some of this, right? Or if you want to take it to the cross line of business transformation, there are vendors there that do it as well. But really, whether or not you want us to do just a part of this area or plug in for the entire area, we can do it. So Alteryx gives you an end-to-end platform, but it also works in a great, better together fashion with your existing investments. So let me give you an example of a story where Alteryx has actually, come in and made a difference. So Walmart has a global investigations team, and Walmart, as you know, does just, many transactions each year. And what they were starting to notice is a certain type of transaction that was involving a high dollar gift card was showing up to be abnormally fraudulent, meaning people were actually putting money on these high dollar gift cards without actually applying the funds against it. And so there's a lot of fraud that was taking place that was actually hurting the individual stores from a profitability perspective. So enter Alteryx. They actually built a workflow that got kind of into a real-time fashion to help relevant stakeholders understand when a transaction looked like it could be from a bad actor who had done this before and might have additional enhanced risk of fraud. They then fed that workflow into a Tableau server for visualization. So in a near real-time fashion, they could be alerted that, hey, this might be something that we want to take a deeper look at, right? Just by doing that, they were able to cut millions of dollars out of this pretty complicated and comprehensive scheme that had become this nationwide kind of fraud scheme that was taking place across their Walmart and Sam's Club stores. Ended up saving Walmart, millions of dollars annually, kind of rooting out this high-value gift card scheme. Just a simple example of how you can take the Alteryx Analytics platform and apply it against a real-world business problem. Another one that is directly in my business unit. So we work with Atkins. Atkins assists FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, part of DHS, to help apply resource management against impending disasters. So Atkins has done a great job of building models using a lot of the geospatial capabilities within Alteryx to say, hey, if we have a hurricane coming or we have something like that that's about to strike, let's take a look at what are the likely property structures that are going to be impacted the most so that we can kind of pre-position and deploy assets to take preventative action and or respond immediately after the disaster to make sure everybody's okay. The type of complicated geospatial analytics model they've built is really made capable because Alteryx makes it very easy for citizen data scientists to take this whole data science application to the next level. So it's an example of where Alteryx is being deployed in DHS for real world results. But there's a lot of use case areas, and I know each of you have your own area that's your domain that you care about. And the purpose of this slide is just to let you know whether that's finance, tax, and revenue management, whether you're doing procurement management or tracking fraud, waste, and abuse, whether you're doing fee optimization, say at patent and trademark, or whether you're doing public health or government health analytics, where you're looking at patient outcomes, contact tracing, epidemic tracking, effectiveness of the doctors, the patient wait times, or if you're in the defense business and you're looking at like, hey, how can we pre-position resources to guard against a cybersecurity threat? Or maybe you're doing some sort of disaster management response like we talked about with FEMA. Alteryx has a technology that can really apply against the data area you care about, whether it's HR, finance, policy, logistics, development. There's value there for you. And it's not just a federal solution. Public sector covers a whole bunch of domains, right? State and local, huge needs with regards to data, both from a revenue management perspective, the same patient health outcomes we just talked about, criminal justice, case management, higher education, student recruitment, things like that, all can be utilized in Alteryx, all the way through to human services, whether you're looking at family and children outcomes, making sure you're maximizing your resources in a way that provide the greatest outcome to your citizens. Alteryx can help. Used widely across state governments, city governments, higher education, K through 12 entities to drive better outcomes for the folks that deploy it. And lastly, my last slide, I'm going to leave you with this. This is the APA platform kind of in the 30-second version, right? The message I want you to take from what we just talked about here is that Alteryx can start anywhere. It's not, you don't have to deploy the full end-to-end platform. Maybe you want to do data quality, descriptive and diagnostic analytics. Maybe you want to do predictive, prescriptive, and spatial analytics because you already have the left-hand column there covered. Or maybe you just want to do data science, machine learning because you already have the other two covered. Alteryx can plug and play anywhere in your organization's journey on this analytics journey to drive better, more informed results. And over the next 30-minute demo and over the next hour and a half that you spend with us, I hope that you take a few insights home with you that can help Alteryx help you on whatever analytics journey you're on. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jimmy.
Awesome. Thanks, Porter. Let me make sure. All right, I am not muted. That is a good thing to check before I start talking, isn't it, guys? But no, I appreciate that run through, Porter. I think that does a good job to set the stage for Alteryx and where it fits in within the market, but also specifically, it helps to frame the things we're going to be talking about today. The things that I liked at the beginning, Porter, that you shared were just the analytic challenges that businesses currently face and the problem with upskilling, and those are two areas that Alteryx definitely helps on. And we're going to be just scratching the surface of Alteryx today. So the goal is that we want to first show you a quick demonstration of Alteryx so that you guys are familiar with what an end-to-end process can look like. We will highlight some of the capabilities of Alteryx. We'll also get more into the functionality of Alteryx and how things are constructed, because after the demo, we're going to transition to the hands-on lab portion, where together we're going to build a process where we're connecting to data and we're starting to join data. We're starting to create fields, filtering data. So we'll actually walk through a process and get you guys comfortable with the mechanics of creating your own workflow with Alteryx. At the end of today's session, you should have a good understanding of what the Alteryx designer can do from a high level. Additionally, you should be able to start building your own workflows. So if you don't currently have access to an Alteryx trial, that's something that you can freely grab from the website. You can start to test it with your own data and start to build out some processes after today. Before we dive into the demo, a few housekeeping items that I want to cover. So first of all, let me share my screen. And Porter or Jeremy, one of you I think is going to have to make me presenter first, please. Awesome, thank you. All right, so let me share my screen here. Okay, so you guys are looking at Oracy Labs. So you all should have received an email that allows you to test your connection. And thank you to those that tested that connection ahead of time. It also gives you the unique link in order for you to access your lab environment. So let's talk very briefly about that lab environment, because there's some things that you guys can be doing right now to ensure that you have access and everything is up and ready to go, so that when we hit the hands-on portion, we can hit the ground running. So I am in the My Labs area. You guys will have a similar view to there. It should already have been launched and up and running for you. So if you guys can just confirm that you have access to that, I will tell you what to do if you don't have access to that. Ensure that you have access to that. This little icon right here where my cursor is, the little right up and right down and left arrow, allows you to expand the screen. And then from this view as well, you can see we can even toggle this to full screen. So the 4 arrows gets you in full screen mode. So assuming that you have more than one monitor, I recommend that you watch my screen on one monitor and you've got your screen up on a separate monitor. So for right now, just make sure that you do have access to this lab environment, that you're able to get in. And additionally, what you can do is you can go ahead and launch the Alteryx Designer. So give that a double click and it will launch. The other thing to confirm is that we have a class files folder down below. All right, so let's say that not all of those apply to you. You're either having difficulty accessing the lab, you don't see the class files folder, you have a question even as we're building out the workflow. So in order to request assistance from one of the sales engineers that we have here roaming virtually the classroom, if you could please use the WebEx chat. So inside of chat, there's a WebEx, inside of WebEx, there is a chat functionality. If you open up the chat and ask to send the message to all panelists, that will go to the entire team of SEs here, and they'll make sure that you're getting help. All right, so that should cover off on all of the housekeeping items that I wanted to cover. So let me pull up Alteryx Designer. So again, what I want to do first is I'm going to walk through a demonstration. I ask that you guys just watch as I'm going through this. After we're done this, then we'll transition to the hands-on portion. All right, so we are looking at the Alteryx Designer. Porter talked about a lot of capabilities of Alteryx, and a lot of those capabilities are contained right here within the Alteryx Designer. The Alteryx Designer is really the foundation for everything inside of Alteryx. So we do have other products available as well, but this is really the foundation is what we're going to focus on today, the Alteryx Designer. When you guys launch Alteryx for the first time in the Oracy Labs environment that we're going to talk about here shortly, you'll be presented with either a blank canvas or even with something that says start here. But for today, what I want to focus on is I'm going to focus on a pre-built solution so that we can start to talk about some of the core capabilities of Alteryx and how it does allow a data analyst who maybe doesn't have experience in coding in Python or SQL, doesn't have any predictive skills or spatial skills, how they can start to take a process and they can automate that using the Alteryx Designer. So first, let's talk about the data that we're looking at here inside of this demo. So we have a few data sets, but the main one that we're dealing with here is we have contracts, and these contracts span several years. And what we want to do is we have been tasked with answering some questions about these contracts. So we're going to want to, or we've been asked to create a standardized report that's going to summarize some of the details of these contracts, along with some other inputs that we're going to look at here shortly. We have been tasked with building a predictive model that can forecast what the contract value is by year, even by month. So looking at historical monthly contract volume, what we can do is we can predict what the contract volume is going to be next month and the month after and the month after. And so the data that we have here is a contract. We can see the receiving agency name. We've got details like the order number, the description, the date that it was awarded, the contract family, contract number, and then there's other information on the right-hand side of it as well. Some flags for whether or not it's a small business or veteran-owned, things like that. All right, so let's look at this first process up here, and let me walk you through what we're doing here. So we're taking that input file, this little icon that you see. Again, I'm going to do some mix of talking about some features and also trying to let you know some of the capabilities, because I realize that we are going to build this out here together shortly. So whenever I click on this icon here, each of these icons you'll hear me refer to as a tool or a building block. So what these tools allow you to do is to do something different, do a different thing to your data. So in this the very start of our process, we're connecting to our data sources. So this is that Excel file that I just showed you inside of Excel. This is how we can connect to that and read it inside of Alteryx and start to manipulate the data. So the first thing that we do with our file is we link it into the browse in order to start understanding the cleanliness of our data. So a lot of times whenever we're working with a file, it might be automatically generated by some system, or perhaps someone sent it to us, or some client passed it along to us. And so we might not be completely familiar with the data quality. Are there any null values? Are there any missing values? Are there things like leading, trailing, white space? Are there records that are outside of an expected range? So this browse allows us to examine all of those things. So down here, for example, in parent number, you can see that I can easily see that we have a lot of null values from that yellow bar. Order description as well. We have a lot of red, which tells us that we do have some kind of leading or trailing white space in there. With any numeric fields, I'm going to see things like the minimum, maximum value, the average. And so the fact that I noticed that we do have some leading, trailing, white space, and some nulls, the next step that I would do is I would drag and drop. So if I didn't already have that tool onto the canvas, I would simply just place this and connect it. More on that when we build out together. But I build the data, or I drop the data cleansing in order to start to clean up some of those missing values. One of the things that you'll notice that's common throughout the Alteryx Designer is the ability to simply point and click on the left-hand side in order to configure an action to happen to your data. So going back to what Porter had mentioned about upskilling individuals, this is a way where data analysts can start to easily manipulate their data in ways that don't require any coding. So we've cleansed our data. I'm going to hit some of the highlights here. The next thing that we really want to do is we want to only target a certain set of data. Remember, the goal of this is we needed to create a standardized report on our data set. And so in this case, what we're doing is we want to make sure that we're only looking at contracts that have a positive value. Perhaps there are some bad data that was coded as negative. There might be some that were just entered in with a $0 value for whatever reason. We don't want to analyze those. We also don't want to look at anything inside of 2020. And so if we haven't closed out the 2020 fiscal year yet, we only want to report on the last fiscal year that completed, which is 2019. One of the things that I really love about even just something as simple as the ability to filter data is we're not going to eliminate the data that don't meet these criteria. It's simply going to, each record is going to go out either the T or the F side. So one of the things you notice is that when I click on the T anchor, and let me zoom in nice and tight for you guys, we're viewing the data down below where those conditions were met. So the obligated value greater than 0, fiscal year is under 2020. However, I can click on the F anchor, and now I'm viewing the data that did not meet those two conditions. So obligated value is not greater than 0, or the fiscal year is not under 2020. So we're not throwing those data away, we're simply isolating them. So if you did want to do a separate analysis, you could start to build a separate branch off of that F. So really we're giving the power to that end user to decide what it is they want to do with their data throughout the process. The next step is we need to aggregate our data by fiscal year by state. So we have now rolled up our data. We're looking at each fiscal year broken out by state and get the sum of the obligated value. So that's our contract value. I mentioned that we have other data sets that we're bringing into the equation here. We also, as part of our standardized report that we're asked to create here, we have unemployment rates by state broken out by year. We also have the adult population that we're bringing in. So another nice thing about Alteryx is there is not a limit to the amount of data sets that you're consuming inside of a workflow. It's also not restricted to just a few different types. So in this example, we're bringing in multiple Excel files, but these could have easily been text files. They could have been data in a database. It could have been cloud-based data if your data reside out there. So a variety of data sources you're able to consume using the Alteryx Designer. And the first thing that we want to do with these two is we just want to merge them together. So I can now merge my data so that I can see the unemployment rate against the 2019 population. And then what we'll do is we'll then merge that with the contract value. So as you can see, after just a handful of tools here, we now have 3 data sources combined where we're looking at the aggregated contract value by year by state alongside each state's unemployment rate and that adult population. So again, skipping a couple steps here, we're going to do a couple renames and just sort our data based on year and on the state. And at this point, we just want to output to an Excel file. So with the output data tool, we can now start writing out our data to a variety of data sources. So in this case, I need to take that, the result of my aggregated values that have been filtered and joined to our unemployment and adult population. And now we have a process that is automated that will spit out that Excel file. So this process, I imagine that all of you could do this pretty easily in Excel. But the nice thing about here is that it's now automated. We're not having to manually do those VLOOKUPs each time. We're not having to create that pivot table each time, do the filtering. I don't have to go through and do my data quality checks. That's all contained here in the browse tools. So even though this is, again, just scratching the surface of some of the functionality of Alteryx, still demonstrates the fact that this process is now an automated process where I can also go through and I can view any of the data lineage. I can make sure that data, for example, in this join tool, that we don't have any fall off. So in this case, we do have actually some unjoined records. And it looks like based on the place of performance state, we have maybe some territories that weren't picked up by the unemployment rate or the adult population. So if those are data elements that we need in our final report, well, we can see them here. We can see that they weren't included. We can easily add them back in after the fact. So there is a nice layer of insight into your data. All right, so there's a couple other things I want to pick up on here. I want to mention with you guys. So I know back when I was an analyst, I would get a lot of what if questions thrown at me. So a manager or another analyst would ask, what if we did X, Y, Z, or what if we changed the discount rate, or what if the forecast was based on something different that you're not currently taking into consideration? And even sometimes a simple question like that can create a lot of work, right? It's easy to ask the question. Answering the question can be a lot more time consuming. And so one of the things I like about Alteryx is that it's really easy to do those sorts of, or answer those ad hoc what if questions. And so in this example, let me open up this box here. The what if question is, well, we want to build a forecast for those contract values, but we don't know what should our forecast be built off of. Should it be a simple moving average, or should we do a weighted average? Which one's going to produce a better forecast and result in more accuracy going forward? And so we can test both of those again in an automated fashion where we can go back and make tweaks and changes if we want. So one of the things I want to highlight here that we haven't talked about yet is the ability to create a new field. So in this case, we're using a formula in order to create some new fields. So I'm taking that award date. And if you guys remember the award date, if I can draw your attention to where my mouse is bouncing, we have a 4-digit year, 2-digit month, 2-digit day. What we're asking is simply give me the year out of that. And then in the next field that we're creating called award month, we're asking for the month from that. So that if I scroll away to the right-hand side, you can see those new fields getting created from the formulas that we've generated over there on the left-hand side. So very easy to start creating new formulas or creating new fields using formulas inside of the Alteryx Designer. Let me, I guess just so that we're understanding what's happening here, what we're doing now is we're creating a moving average. So what I'm doing is I'm averaging across multiple rows. So since our data are sorted by year and month, what I'm saying here is give me the average of the previous 3 months in addition to the current month. So we're taking a 4-month rolling average. And again, something like this is just so easy to configure, in this case using what's called the multi-row formula to get that, that simple moving average field generated on the right-hand side. We actually have a tool that is specific for creating that weighted average. So now when we join them together, we have our simple moving average and our weighted average right next to one another. What we then do is we calculate the difference. I showed you guys the formula tool already. So we're just figuring out what's the difference between those two. And I don't know how many Tableau users we have out here, but we can actually start to send data directly to the Tableau data extract file format, additionally the hyperfile format. Or for those that are Tableau server customers, we could write directly out to a Tableau server. So we like to, or I guess I should say, we don't care where your data ultimately come from or where they go. If they want to go, if you want them to be presented in Tableau, great, we'll help with that. If you want them to ultimately be presented in PowerPoint or in PDF or in Excel, great. If they need to go back out to some database, great. Yeah, we're not concerned with the ultimate destination of the data. So in this case, we create a hyperfile. Additionally, what we're going to do is we're going to create a PDF file as well. And actually, we're creating a PDF for each year. And so let me show you what that looks like. So we now have the award year, the month, the total contract value, how many contracts created that, as well as those two fields we calculated and the difference in a bar graph. Just an example of what an output from that can look like. And the last thing that I'll show you in this demonstration before we start to dive in and get our hands dirty with Alteryx is I want to show you how we can start to build some, actually 2 more things. But what I want to show you here is how we can start to do some forecasting. Because remember, the answer on this, or the question is what if scenario was, what was the difference if we built a model with simple moving average or weighted average? And so we just looked at what the difference was between the contract values in each of those months, depending on which of those 2 values we looked at. But one of the neat things is we can actually also build a predictive model. And so if I click on this, we are building what's called an exponential smoothing model. So it's a time-based forecast that's going to look at historical values of this field right here, the obligated value, or what I've been calling the contract value, the aggregated contract value. So it's going to build a predictive model that's going to be able to tell us with a certain degree of accuracy what our total contract value will be for the upcoming months. And so after we just apply that forecast, if I click on this output here, we can see a graph of what those values are going to look like. So you can see the cyclical nature of those forecasts. And even if I click on this this O output, we can see what the forecasted value is for the upcoming months. So you can see I asked to forecast all the way through looks like April of 2022, and we get the forecast as well as the confidence band. So with a 95 degree with 95% certainty, we know that this forecast is going to fall within 130 and 28. So obviously, as we get farther out and as we get more confident, that range is going to be wider than if we were 80% confident. Well, then the high comes down a little bit and the low comes down a little bit. So again, this person didn't need to have any predictive background predictive knowledge. There wasn't any coding required in order to build this predictive process.
Jimmy, it's Maria. Is it possible for us to just pause for one moment?
Sure.
I have one individual who's really trying to get in, and it doesn't look like she did get a login from Oracy. Is it possible to shoot one over to her if I give you the email address, or do we just need to keep going at this point?
Yeah, if you could reach out to Jeremy and see if he can
Yep.
take care of that.
Absolutely, thanks.
Great, sure thing. All right, guys. Last thing that I want to mention, I do want to cover off on this because I feel like that this is such a core feature of Alteryx and really of people's day-to-day of wanting to understand data quality through text. And so in this case, what we want to do is we want to understand if the contract number was in an appropriate format. So for any of you that have ever dealt with data that's been manually entered by somebody else, and then it's your job to analyze the data or deal with the data, I know that you've gone through the headache of what if they entered something wrong, or what if at some point that the method for capturing the data changed. So maybe it used to be 6 digits of dash and 3 digits. Then later on, they removed the dash, and now it's just 9 digits. So there are those sorts of instances that can cause us headaches when we're trying to analyze the data with something like Excel. Inside of Alteryx, what we can do is we can check to see if the data are in a certain format, and if they are, treat them differently, get them all into that same format so that they can then be analyzed in a standardized way. So I just wanted to draw your attention to the text to columns, which is going to allow us to, if I zoom in here, you guys can see that we are expecting to have a couple dashes inside of this. And so what I can do is I can separate the value before the first dash to the values that came after the first dash. Well, there are also some that you can see in this case that don't have a dash. And so in this way, I stopped the analysis here, but you can see we can isolate those into 2 different groups, standardize them to the approved approved method, whichever one that is, and then join them back together so that we can now apply the same methodology to all the data, regardless of the process that was used to create that field. So lots of different things we can do inside of Alteryx. The great thing is that it's really up to you as the user to piece it together. So with that, let's transition over to Oracy Labs and let's start to build this in a hands-on way. All right. So again, you guys should hopefully by now you've gotten Oracy Labs all squared away. We'll go very slow at the beginning just to make sure everyone is up and running and not having issues. So Again, if you guys can go to your Oracy Labs environment, if you can, if you haven't already, open up Alteryx, launch Alteryx, and I'm going to toggle over to full screen mode just to help you guys out. I'm also going to, you can see that says there's a new version of the Designer available. I'm just going to hide mine. You don't have to, but just to give myself a little bit more real estate, I'm going to do that. All right, I'm just going to do a quick scan of the chat, make sure that we are good. All right, so actually, I'm getting one question here, and I do want to address it here. So the question is there a particular reason that you didn't format the date data, the year in particular, to not use commas? Wouldn't that cause issues? That's a really good point. Inside of Alteryx, no, how we're viewing the data in the bottom isn't going to cause issues, whether it has commas or it doesn't have commas. That doesn't really affect how the data are going to be analyzed or consumed whenever we write out the data. So, you know, the main thing to consider whenever you're dealing with data inside of Alteryx is the data type. Is it a string, meaning is it text, or is it a number, or is it a date field? There are ways to change data types in Alteryx. But then the other thing is, once we want to output it to whatever the format is that we want to consume it in the end, we can do whatever sort of manipulation to the view of that data before we output it. So yeah, it's a good question. Thanks for bringing that up. And I'll try to keep my eyes on the chat as well. If you guys do just have those general overall questions of how does Alteryx handle XYZ? And as a reminder, I will make sure that I am leaving 15 minutes minimum at the end so that we can address some of those high level questions as well. So if you have some questions that are just, would it work on XYZ use case? Yeah, absolutely would love to address that. And I'll make sure that I'm keeping time at the end. All right, so we all should now be in the Alteryx Designer inside of Oracy Labs. Again, as a reminder, if you do have issues using the WebEx chat, please send your chat to all panelists, and one of our SE roamers will make sure that we're taking care of you. All right, so the screen here, if you guys aren't currently there, if you can make sure that you have a brand new workflow open. The way that you can do that is if you click on this little plus sign right here where my cursor is bouncing, that will open up a brand new workflow. It should just be a white screen like you see on mine. Okay, first things first, we need to connect to some data. So let's connect to some data, and then let's talk about what we're going to do. But I feel like it's easier if we first are viewing the data before we start talking about what we're going to do. And to start off, we're going to have 3 files we're going to work with. So the first thing I want you guys to do is, if you can go to the input data, and if you can drag and drop that onto the white portion, what we call the canvas. So the way you do that is if you left click, hold your left mouse cursor, and then let go of the left mouse cursor, or your primary mouse key, depending on if you mouse lefty or righty. You should now be on a screen that looks like this. So what's changed is the left-hand side is now pointing to our input data, asking for us to configure it. So what we need to do now is we need to go and point to that data source. So I'm going to do this once. I'm going to go rather slowly, and then I'm going to delete it, and I'm going to redo it. So if you don't follow along entirely on this first step here, don't worry, I'm going to repeat myself. All right, so let's go connect to that data source here. So if we click on this down arrow here, that'll bring up a view that's going to ask us if we want to connect to a file, a database. Go ahead and click on Files. Should be your third option on the left. And then if you take your mouse cursor to the right, there's a blue button that says Select File. Go ahead and click on where it says Select File. That's going to bring up our view to navigate to our file. And so where we want to go here is I'm going to click on Desktop. because remember that class files folder is on our desktop. And let's double click on class files. And we're going to click on the subfolder. And the first file that we want to grab is called finance data. So if you double click on finance data, the option, it's an Excel file, so it's asking us which sheet do you want to consume. Let's keep 2016 and then go down and press OK. All right, so as promised, I'm going to do that again. So let me delete this and let me start over and pretend like I didn't do that. Okay, so if you've already done it, great. And actually, if you want to, you can go repeat the same process for 2017 and 2018 because we want 3 inputs connected to all 3 of those sheets. So you'd have to drag and drop an additional input in order to get that. All right, so again, the way that we did that, drag and drop an input data onto the canvas, click on the down arrow, click on Files, click on Select File, navigate to your desktop, open up the class files folder, open up the subfolder, and the file that we want is called finance data. We double clicked on that. It asked us which sheet we wanted to consume. We left it at 2016 and we clicked OK. Okay, so before we go on and do that again for the other 2, for those of you that I said go, feel free to do it. If you could take a break here and follow along with me because we need to do something in this data set. So something that you guys are probably noticing if you look at the data is it doesn't really start until line 4. It does look like there's some total units information up at the top. We're not going to be concerned with that in our data set. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to clean this up so that our top row here is our column headers because it represents our column headers, but right now it's line 4. So in the Alteryx world, we really want that to be the very top line. So the way that we can do that is if we scroll down, whoops, I pressed my scroll button and it was on my file format. Let me get back to here. If we go back to, if we go down to option number 7, so in the top portion of this configuration window where I'm bouncing my mouse cursor, if you scroll down so that number 7 is visible, where it says data import online, let's go ahead and let's change that. And I'm going to do a little bit of trial and error here. I know it says 4 next to it, but I think that in Excel that actually then is the, oh no, I lied. The data itself starts on line 5. So the column header's on line 4, the data itself starts on line 5. So go ahead and change that number 1 to a number 5, and then click the refresh button. So what you notice when we did that is those unnecessary header rows are now gone. The great thing about this is that anytime we run this process, those header rows are going to be gone. So if this process were repeated weekly and you go in there and your first step in Excel is highlight the top 4 lines, right click, delete, that's now gone. We don't have to worry about going in there and doing that step. And so as we're going through this process, think about things that you do day in and day out where you're having to manually manipulate things, and just imagine those now being automated because that's exactly what we're doing here. All right, so we have 3 years that we want to analyze. So let's go through that same process of bringing in 2017 and 2018, and then we'll talk about what it is that we want to do with the rest of our time here. So let's go back up to our input data. Let's drag and drop this onto the canvas. I'm going to place it directly below that other input that we just dropped on. So you guys should remember this now. You should be pros at this point. Go ahead and click on the down arrow. Click on Files. Click on Select File. the most recent folder where you accessed a data file should be already up for you, so we shouldn't have to go back and click on desktop. And remember, it was finance data, so double click on finance data. This time I'm going to change it to 2017. Click OK. And same deal, we need to change the data import online to 5. So on the left-hand side in the configuration window, make sure that you expose option number 7, change the 1 to a 5. If you want to confirm that it's going to work, you can click this refresh button right here and make sure that it pops up there. So a question I'm seeing, sorry, I'm trying to keep my eyes every once in a while on the chat, so if I see one that's interesting, I might go ahead and take it now. Question is, what happens if new data is added to the bottom later in time? Will Alteryx bring it in? Yeah, that's one of the great things about Alteryx is that if the data set changes later on, if there's new data added, yeah, that will be reflected in this entire process. So anytime there's a new record, anytime there's a change, an adjustment, a modification to an existing record, if I click run, which we haven't done yet, but if I run this process, those changes will be reflected in the workflow. And the other nice thing too is if there are going to be changes even to like the fields, what fields are contained in there, there are ways that we can build this workflow to be dynamic to handle any sort of potential changes that might happen depending on who's sending us the data set. So yeah, appreciate the question. I'm glad you guys are thinking about how this would work in your day-to-day as well. All right, guys, one more input to bring in. We have one more sheet of data. Let's drag and drop another input file. Click on the down arrow, files, select file, finance data 2018. I went through that one rather fast. We just repeated the exact same process. If anyone needs that again or help on that, please throw it into the chat. And remember, the last step here is we need to go start our data import on line 5, option number 7 in your configuration window. Click refresh and there we go. Okay, so let's talk about the data and let's talk about the use case that we want to solve here. So we've got a, I guess from a high level, I'm going to expand this just so that we can see this a bit better. So from a high level, what we have here is we have sales data across different segments in different countries. So I've got this geo segment here, and you can see it looks like that we have a country underscore and then a segment, enterprise, mid-market, small business, government, channel, etc. We have a currency for the sales volume. And then we have information like what the product that was sold, how many units were sold, what the manufacturing price was, the sales price, gross, and then sales over here and profit. So a lot of interesting information, along with you can see some unnecessary columns that it looks like Excel was hanging on to for whatever reason. I'll show you guys how to clean that up later on. So we've got sales data across different dates for different currencies and different geo segments. So what we want to do is ultimately what we're going towards is we are going to aggregate our data so that we know what's total profit broken out by country and geo segment, or segment rather. So we have this profit field right here. What's the total profit for Canada Enterprise? After we take into account that we're looking at Canadian dollars and we want that standardized in perhaps US dollars. We also, if there's time, we want to create a pivot-like table so that we can see the it broken out into what's a low performer, mid performer, high performer. And all along the way, we're going to do some standardization methods to our data, make sure the data are clean, do some combining. So we'll do a lot of the very common things that you'll do in most Alteryx processes. Remember the goal of this. At the end of this, you guys should be able to start connecting to your data and performing some basic tasks with your data inside of the Alteryx Designer. Cool. All right, let me resize this here for you guys. So we all should have those 3 inputs together. The first thing that we want to do is right now we're looking at data across 3 separate years in 3 different sheets. I don't want to have to do a standardization to the 2016 and then one to the 2017 and then one to the 2018. I would ideally like to combine these into one flow, into one stream, so that any subsequent step I do, I only have to do once. I don't have to repeat that step 3 separate times. So in the Alteryx world, we want to union our data together. And so if you look at the top, inside of your favorites category, we have the union tool. One thing that you'll notice too is if you click on that tool icon up at the top, it's going to give you a little blurb about what that does. So you can read up on what the union tool does. It combines 2 or more data sets with similar structures. That's perfect. That's exactly what we have. We have 2 or more data sets with similar structures. So let's go ahead and drag that onto the canvas. And I'm just going to put it right in the middle. From a technical standpoint, it doesn't matter where you drop these onto the canvas. What does matter is the connections. And so let's talk about those connections right now. What you'll notice is right now, our data are not connected into the union. In the previous example that I showed you, I had a lot of different connections on the screen. So you notice that there's a line that's connecting one green anchor, is the term we use, to another. So that shows me visually that the data are flowing out of one into another. And so what we need to do now in this example is, whoops, over here, I need to connect each sheet into the union. So the way I do that is, if you hover over that green anchor, and let me zoom in for you guys so that you can see it nice and tight here. If I hover over that right-hand side, I can left click and while holding the left mouse button, drag that into the input anchor of the union. Once you get close, it should snap into place, at which point you can let go of the left mouse button, and we have now established that connection. So that line shows me that the data are going to flow from my 2016 sheet into the union. And what we'll want to do is we'll want to repeat that process for 2017 and 2018. So I'll go slow with 2018 again for those that need it. Hover over the right-hand side. That your mouse icon should change what it looks like. Give it a left click, drag to the input side of the union, and release. So those 3 lines should connect like you see on my screen there. Give you guys just another quick second in order to get squared away. So a
Hey,
question.
Jimmy, real quick. Oh,
Yeah.
I think you're going to answer it. Go ahead.
Perfect. Well, you tell me if I did. So a question of how to remove an anchor or how to remove a line. So if you have a line that you didn't want connected, what you can do is you can left click on the line itself and press the delete key. Or you could just right click and say delete connection. So two ways to do the exact same thing. I like to usually just right click and say delete connection because it tells me if I actually clicked on the right spot. So if you do need to delete one, if you need to right click and say delete connection, you can see it goes away, and then you can always change it to into the input anchor where you need it to go. And yes, that will happen frequently in your Alteryx life. I know that sometimes I try to build things too quickly and I end up connecting tools that I did not intend. And so, yeah, there's a lot of deleting connections in order to reestablish. Perfect. All right, so what we haven't done yet is configure the union. So let's go ahead and let's give the union a left click. And now on the left-hand side in your configuration window, this is where we're configuring the union tool. You'll also notice that it's the highlighted tool because it's got a little blue perforated line. around the union, that's letting me know that that is the highlighted or active tool. So the other windows that you see on the screen, the configuration and the results, are both applying to that highlighted or active tool. There's actually not anything we need to do to this configuration. So the way that the default configuration for the union is to auto config by name, which is where my cursor is. And all that means is that if the field names are the same, they're going to stack on top of one another. It doesn't matter where they appear in the data set. If something is named profit, it's going to stack on top of any other field that's named profit in any other data set. So that's another great way to standardize data that might come to you in multiple ways. It might be the third field in one and the sixth field in another. If we auto config by name, we're going to match them on top of one another. Sometimes you just care about the position of the order of the columns. Well, we could change the auto config by name to handle that the first column goes on top of the first, the second on the second, etc. Or we could even manually. So there's a lot of different ways that we can configure each of these tools as we're going through today. Awesome. I love the enthusiasm I'm seeing from a couple people in the chat. And yes, we do work with Microsoft Access database tables as well. Another question I just saw come in. If you just, I used to know the URL for this by heart, but I don't anymore. I think it changed. But if you Google Alteryx data sources, that should take you, the first hit up there should take you to all the supported data sources that we can both read from and write to. Okay, so if we want to view the data inside of Alteryx, when I was walking you through the process before, remember I was clicking on all the anchors and we were seeing the data at the bottom. I was kind of showing you without really ever describing exactly where the data was and where I was clicking and how we got there. So let me show you exactly now how we get there. So in order for this process to run, and by run I mean to read in those three data sets and union them together, what we need to do is we need to go over to this blue button on the top right of your screen where my cursor is bouncing and give it a left click. So what happens when we do that is the process runs. So the data was consumed from those three different sources and union together. You can see it tells us how long it took to run, which point I'll say, okay, thank you. And now we can view on the bottom of our screen the result of our union. So first of all, one question I want to answer is, how do I know I'm looking at the data outside of the union or coming out of the union? There's really two ways that you know that. One is, if I zoom in here, this anchor it's visually popping up off the screen. So if I click back off of it, notice how it's more subdued. And if I click on it, it visually pops up. So that visual pop-up is an indicator that we're looking at the results down below. The other is, you can see here in the results window itself, it says that I'm viewing the results of the union tool, and that output anchor is the one that's highlighted at the bottom. So there are multiple ways that we are alerted to the fact that we're viewing the data coming out of the union. So this shouldn't look too dissimilar to the other inputs. Really the only exception is that we now have all three years. So I can scroll down within here and I can see all three of those years reflected in that date field, 2016, 2017, 2018. So that's just a quick visual confirmation that we are seeing all three of those. Awesome, thank you. Kevin just linked the data sources. So if you are curious about the data sources that Alteryx can work with, go look at the chat inside of WebEx. Kevin was nice enough to provide that link for me. All right, remember the ultimate goal, where we're going. We want to, the main question we want to answer is, what is the total profit standardized to the same currency by each country and segment? So right now, I have a country underscore segment. I want to separate those two from one another. I want one column for the country and I want a separate column for the segment. So those should be two separate columns. As you can see here in the data set, they all are separated by an underscore. So that then becomes a very easy process of taking that one field with that underscore delimiter and splitting it into two. So let's walk through how to do that, that task together. So what I want to do is I want to go up to my text to columns. And I'm going to drag and drop this to the right-hand side of the union. Before I let go of my mouse cursor, I want to draw your attention to the fact that there's a dotted line right now connecting the union to the text to columns. What that means is if I let go of my mouse, that connection is going to automatically be established. So I won't have to go through, left click on the output anchor and drag it to the input anchor. It automatically did that for me. However, if you did not combine, if you didn't drop that in such a way that it automatically connected, you could do the process that we just did previously. All right, so let's configure this text to column. So the column to split is the geo segment. Remember, that's the one with the country underscore segment. Our delimiter was an underscore, so there's a comma in there by default. So go ahead and delete the comma and place in an underscore. And the last thing we're going to do is we're going to change the number of columns from 3 to 2, because we only want 2 columns coming out of this, the country and the segment. So once you have that configured, go ahead and click run. I'm going to leave it up here for just a second so that everyone can make sure that that they have the appropriate configuration. A question I see is do you generally combine the data sets and then clean them, or are there cases you'd want to clean ahead of the combination? Yeah, that's a good one. If the data are messy in the exact same way, I recommend combine and then clean. So if there are the same issues in each data set, combine them and then clean them. However, there might be times where 2016 is messy in its own way, and then they changed how they did things. And so 2017 is messy in a different way, and then they changed things. And 2018 is messy in its own unique way. In that case, I clean to standardize and then I combine. One of the reasons why I love Alteryx is that there isn't a set way to do something per se. It's really up to you as the person that understands the data and understands what needs to happen in the end, what the end result needs to look like. You've got all the tools at your disposal. You can go and build it. All right, so if you haven't already, go ahead and click the run button in the top right. Remember, make sure you're looking at that output anchor of the text to columns. And the 2 new fields that we created, if you scroll all the way to the right-hand side, are over there. So it's called GeoSegment 1 and GeoSegment 2. So Alteryx just took the root name of the field, GeoSegment, and then it enumerated them. Number 1, column number 2. All right, so I don't know about you guys, but all these extra columns are kind of driving me a little bit bonkers. We've got all these column 29, column 27, etc. There's nothing in them. This yellow indicator bar tells me that it's completely null, nothing in there. I also want to rename these. GeoSegment 1 and GeoSegment 2 aren't very descriptive, so I want to give that a better name. So in order to do those cleanup methods that I just mentioned, we're going to use the select. So with that select, as you can read, we select, deselect, reorder, and rename, and change field types. So let's go ahead and drop this directly after our text to columns. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove column 1 through 33. So you could come in here and you can manually click those checkboxes 33 times. Let me show you a shortcut. So I'm going to highlight column 1 by clicking on this little box right next to the check mark. I'm going to click there. column 1's highlighted. I'm going to go down to column 33 and hold Shift button and give, with my mouse cursor right there, a left click. So hold Shift, left click, and you can see all of those fields are now highlighted. If I then go up to where it says Options near the top of the configuration window, I hover over Select. There is an option to deselect highlighted fields. So click on the top one, hold down Shift, click on the bottom one, go to Options, Select, deselect highlighted fields, and all those checkboxes go away. Or, like I said, clicking them one by one also works. So let's rename the field. So I see a question coming in about how do we rename fields. Yeah, let's do that together right now. Geo segment 1, that's our country, right? That was United States, that was Canada, that's Germany. I'm sure we have tons of other countries that we'll see here shortly. So inside this box here, once you give it a left click, you start typing on your keyboard and it will enter in the text that you typed. So that says county. Let me try again. That says country. And then geo segment 2 is our segment. That was the government, enterprise, small business, etc. So what type of customer are they, or what segment of customer are they? One thing that I'll mention here as well, we talked about the data type with one of the questions. I said it really more depends on not how you're viewing the data inside of Alteryx, what it looks like, but more what the data type is. And so here's just a little glimpse into that. These strings are text fields, and the double is a numeric field, and then date is obviously a date field. Did want to draw your attention to where you can change numbers to text, text to numbers, things like that are contained here inside the select. See another question about what's the unknown at the bottom. I like that question because that's another chance for me to highlight the dynamic nature of this workflow. That unknown checkbox, if it's checked, what that means is if we get a brand new field in our data set, the next time we click run, that's going to pass through the process. That's going to be included in the analysis. So if we get a new field that tells us who the seller was attached to the order, or who the buyer was, those will be included in this workflow. If I don't want any new fields that might get included in those data sets to pass through this tool, the select, I can deselect the unknown. So again, just another way that you can make these workflows dynamic, because in the end, the name of the game is trying to get this process as standardized and as automated as possible. And so just another way that we can save ourselves the trouble or the headache of having to go back and modify a data set, modify the process. One thing to just see a question coming in, you might have a roamer helping you. One thing to check to make sure that your data did split, a very common thing is make sure you're not clicked on the input anchor. If you're on the input anchor and I scroll all the way to the right, it's going to look like that didn't happen. If you click on the output anchor and scroll all the way to the right, you can actually, at that point, see how the data were changed and affected. So maybe that does the trick, and if not, one of our roamers can help you out. All right. So one thing I noticed here, guys, is you, for those of you that have a really good vision, let me zoom in for you. I guess for those that aren't the super seers out there, there's a little tiny red portion in that geo segment, and if I hover over it, that alerts me to the fact that a little over 2% of our data is not okay. And I'll just give you the definition of not okay. I won't make you look that up with our online help. The not okay just means that there's leading and trailing white space. So some of the countries might have a space before it. Some of them might have a space after it. And so if I'm trying to combine all the instances of Canada, and one of them is space and then Canada, and the rest are Canada with no space at the beginning, it's going to treat those as two separate entities or two separate countries. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're standardizing and cleaning our data before we proceed. So just that little indicator bar is a great way to save yourself from some headaches later on when you realized, why is Canada in 2 columns in my pivot table? Well, it's because there was a space before one of them. So we can nip that in the bud right now with that little indicator bar down there. All right, so the way that we're going to do that is, and I will, Josh, answer your question about removing empty columns while I do this as well. The tool that we want to use right now is the data cleansing. So let's go ahead and drop the data cleansing to the right-hand side of the select. The data cleansing is a way that you can perform some more, I'd say the most common cleansing techniques for messy data. So these are just the most common ones. A lot of other ones can be handled via other functions, for example, the formula. But what we want to do here in data cleansing, so if you can follow along with me here, I'm going to click the None button. I'm just going to deselect all of them to start. And I'm going to scroll down to my country and my segment. Those are the 2 that I generated from the text to columns where we split based on the underscore. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave these as is. So if it's a null, I'm going to replace it with a blank or a 0, depending on whether it's a string or a number. But more importantly, the thing that I really want here is this checkbox that's already by default selected. Remove leading and trailing white space. So that will standardize any instances of Canada that have a space before it. And then, Josh, to your question, is there any way to truly remove the empty columns and not have them display? The select tool, the select tool is an easy way to remove columns that you see in your data set. But again, the name of the game is, can we automate as much of the unknown as possible? This tool right here is a great way that we can remove truly null columns. So I could just have clicked this instead of the select in order to remove all of those columns that have 100% null values. So that's another way that we can remove them. So 2 ways to remove those null columns and not have them pass through the analysis. Anytime you add another tool onto the canvas, if we want to see how the results change, we need to come up here and click Run. Once again, it tells us how long it took to run. I say OK. And now if I scroll all the way to the right, so first of all, I guess we haven't really talked about the column 1 through 33 or so being gone. Well, they're gone now. We don't see them. That's great. The other thing that I see here is with country, it doesn't have that any red in that indicator bar. And also the field names have been updated. I realized that I didn't click Run after the select, so they didn't get removed there. So that might have been more of the question, Josh. I might have interpreted it incorrectly. All right, so we're moving along here. I'm going to do this. You guys can follow along here if you want, but if not, this is you could certainly just watch this. It's not going to affect the analysis, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop a browse and click Run. So remember, that was the second thing we talked about when I showed you the demo, is what the browse allowed us to do and what to see. We could see some of the data quality. We could see min, max, average, standard deviation with our numeric fields. So one of the things that I want to do with this is I'm going to come down here to my countries. And you can see that we have a pretty even split: Britain, Canada, France, United States, Germany. And then there's that Seoul guy down there, which no one, please don't judge my pronunciation, Alemania. I think that might be French, question mark. This is the point where someone's probably judging me and maybe slapping themselves on the head. That clearly is incorrect. That is, I'm guessing, based on my knowledge of Spanish, how you say Germany in, I'm again guessing French. Note to self, do some research next time. But I do know with 100% certainty that we need to recode that value to be Germany. So there's a lot of ways we can do this. I'm just going to show you just one of those ways that we can start to update some values. So what I'm going to do is, now this is the part where I want you guys to follow along with me. What I want to do is I want to drop in what's called a text input. So a text input is a way that we can start to we can add in our own values. So in this case, what we want to do is we want to add into our workflow a lookup table for the bad value and next to it, the good value. So let's go ahead and drop this onto the canvas. I'm going to drop it right below my data cleanse. So over here in the top left, this is pseudo Excel. We can manually enter data in. So I'm going to click on the 3 dots above where the box is, and I'm going to give this a name. I'm going to call this bad value. And then I'm going to click on the star immediately to its right. I'm going to call this good value. So these are the column headers that I've just created for my new data set that I'm building that will live inside my workflow. So the bad value is Alemania. Why did that sound Italian to me now? I'm gonna stop saying that out loud for my sake, to not make myself appear more of a fool than I probably already have. So that word that we have under bad value, what we want it to be replaced with, I feel confident in my pronunciation of Germany. So under good value, we'll type in Germany. And the nice thing here too is that if we have a lot of common mistakes or common ways of spelling something that we need to standardize, we can enter those in here. So a common one is company names. So there are lots of ways you can add in like an Inc., or let's just say that it's a customer that has like a space in the middle, and sometimes there is no space, or sometimes there's a dash, or there's common misspellings of it. You can create your own lookup table that can live inside of this workflow. All right, so we have that lookup table. What we want to do now is we want to update our existing data to, if it sees the bad value, replace it with the good value. So inside this this country field over here, if we find that bad value, replace it with the good value. So what I'm going to do is we want to use what's called the find replace. And I'm going to use this opportunity to show you how to find a tool where that you don't know in which category it lives. So one thing I've yet to mention is, well, we are inside the favorites. All the tools that we've used thus far have lived up in here. We actually have a lot of other categories that we can click and open up and see all the tools that live inside of that category. The find replace, for example, maybe you don't know where it lives and you don't want to sit here and click through each of them. We can go to the top right here in the search bar. And so when you guys are on your own, when you download the trial, hopefully after today's session, and you're digging around on your own, I'd encourage you to use this search bar. Not only will it search for the existing tools, but it'll also search our online help. And as Porter mentioned earlier, our online community. It'll search the community and bring up any interesting article or question that's been answered pertaining to whatever you've typed in that box. So I just typed the word find. You can see that it provides me that tool right there. Directly from there, I can drag and drop this onto the canvas. So go ahead, and if you didn't do that, go ahead and do that for me. Or alternatively, it does exist inside the join category. So if you wanted to go drag and drop it from there, you could do that. So inside the find replace, I'd like for you guys to connect both the data cleanse to the F input anchor, the text input to the R input anchor. And let's configure this such that the find within field is pointing to our country. The find value, that's what we want to look for in the existing file. That's the bad value. Any instance of that bad value we want to look for. And we want to replace it with the good value. So we want to update that. All right, so if you guys are content, if you have those configurations set, go ahead and click run. And actually what I should do in order to prove that to myself is I should drop another browse and click run. So I've dropped another browse. Again, you don't have to do this. It's not integral to the workflow itself. It's really just for us to be certain that the change that we affected did happen appropriately, which is important. But if you notice inside this country, this country column, I now only have 5 values, and you can see the value for Germany went from 174 to 175. So I can now be certain that that value did appropriately update with that find replace. All right, a couple other things that we want to do here. The next is let me zoom out a little bit. There are some fields that we have within here, or I'm sorry, there are some values that we have within here for our profit that might be negative. And if those values are negative, then what we want to do is we want to throw them out and investigate them, because we should not have any negative profits. So if we do have records that have a negative profit, then we need to go look into them. Or maybe it could be we could get some negative profit, but that's not something that we want to include in the analysis. It's a rare case. So regardless of the reason why, we want to remove things that have negative profit. So the way that we can remove those records that meet a certain condition is with the filter. So let's go ahead and let's drop on the filter together. So let's drag this, and I'm going to place it, as you can see, if I place it directly to the right, that line connects. And so here, again, what I want to do is I want to keep values where profit is greater than 0. So let's do that together. Let's configure this to say profit is greater than 0. So where it says select column, let's go down and find our profit field. I'm going to change equals to be greater than. And inside the box on the right-hand side, that's the value that I need. I'm going to enter in a 0. So that should say profit is greater than 0. In the case that it's true, the record will go out the T. In the case that it's not true, it'll go out the F. So let's go ahead and click run. And so now you can see going out our T side, we should have positive sales. I'm sorry, positive profit. Another browse tool is an easy way to help check that. Out the F, you can see all of our negative profits as well. And one thing that I haven't drawn your attention to is we get a record count as well. Inside of any of these results windows, you can see 78 records out of the F, 797 out of the T. So question that I'm seeing here is the reason behind the second browse tool in order to see that. Yeah, so the browse tool only shows me the data that are connected. So in this case, the data here are connected to the data cleanse, which at the point of the data cleanse, if I scroll down to country, that was before we had made the change to that country value. And in fact, that was where I would have identified it if I were doing this as a real analysis and taking the time to drop a browse and investigate. So the reason why I wanted to drop another browse is because I wanted to see if in fact this actually did modify the bad value in order to align with the good value. And so the second browse now shows me what the result looks like after the find replace. So then if I go down to country, you can see that Germany, the value for Germany went up to 175. Yeah, so the idea behind the browse tool is it does allow for that further data investigation because it does profile each of those fields. So again, if I were doing this as a real analysis, I would drop another browse after the T and the F, and I could just do a quick spot check and confirm that my function is working appropriately. I've been using Alteryx for long enough now that, for better or for worse, I'm confident that I built that appropriately. That could probably also get me into trouble if I'm just assuming that I'm always doing things correctly. But I definitely encourage, especially as you're beginning in Alteryx, drop a browse and just make sure that that's an easy way to test to see, did I actually filter this appropriately? And so let me, the other way is just clicking on the T and the F and seeing if values go out both. That's a great spot check. But let me show you what that looks like. Again, here's another thing where you can just watch. Don't feel like you have to follow along here. So inside this browse, on the left-hand side, I want to go and navigate down. I'm going to scroll down to my profit. So there's profit. If I click on that field, now I'm getting a more in-depth view of the profile. So the thing that I really want to look at here is what's that minimum value? That minimum value is, well, all I care about is greater than 0. So now I am certain that my filter tool did the job that I wanted. It removed everything that was less than 0 because at my T side, I'm only seeing positive values. That minimum value is positive. So that's my double check as you're building these out to make sure that it's working. One more question I'm seeing here. Some labels auto appear. Can we label the function or add comment? Yeah, that's a great one because commenting these workflows is huge. And I think that is one of the nice things about these workflows is that they are self-documenting in a sense that you can read a workflow. You can understand just by the tool icon, once you get familiar with Alteryx, what's happening. You can also click in to the tool and see the configuration. So you can go and investigate and see what's happening to any process. There's no having to assume what someone did or go question them. Hey, how did you get to this Excel file? Like what did you do? Because you actually manipulated the data. You deleted things, you manually typed things in. None of that's happening with inside the Alteryx Designer. But there are times where you might just want to drop in a comment box and add in, a comment here and there along the way. You can also comment on these specific icons themselves. So if I click in the configuration window, there's this little tag looking icon, and inside of there, I can add in a comment. So we split geo segment. And now when I click back on the canvas, it tells me exactly what happened inside of that tool. So yeah, there are lots of ways to document these workflows and definitely a best practice and in my mind, a huge feature of when you're automating these processes of being able to understand what you did and why you did it. All right, guys, a couple more things we want to do here before we call it a day here. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to bring in another file. So I mentioned that we wanted to standardize to a consistent currency, because one of the features of our data set is that it's the profit is within a certain currency, and we want to standardize that so that we can compare apples to apples. So what we need to do is we need to bring in another data set. So if you guys can follow along with me here, let's drag and drop another input data onto the canvas. I'm just going to drop that right below my profit. I'm sorry, my filtering for profit. So this will test you guys and see how much you remember from the beginning. So if you can do it on your own, fantastic. And if not, here I tried to give you guys a little bit of a head start. If not, here are the steps. So click on that down arrow, click on Files, click on Select File, and let's go grab the exchange rates file and click Open. There should be only one sheet in there, so let's click OK. All right, so here's another one that's a little bit messy. We need to change what is the header row. So if we go down to Start Data Import Online, change that value to 3, and click Refresh, it should be good. So to repeat, to make sure that everyone is on the same page as I am, inside the configuration of the input data, scroll down till you get to number 7, Start Data Import Online, change that value to be a 3, and then click Refresh. Your view should be similar to mine. So this gives us the exchange rate for all of our currencies in our data set. All right. So let's now join our data sets together. I want to join my exchange rate to my profit because we're about to, here in the next couple steps here before we call it a day, is we're going to create a standardized profit field and then we'll do an aggregation. All right, so let's join our data together. So this is something that we talked about in the demo that we haven't done yet together, joining two data sets. We did a find replace, but we haven't done a join. Very similar, there are some slight differences. But let's configure this and see what comes out of it. So go ahead and drag and drop that join onto the canvas. And what we want to connect, let me zoom in again for you guys. We want to connect the T, profit greater than 0, into one side, and the exchange rate into the other. Depending on where you dropped the join, perhaps the F automatically connected. Remember how to do that. You right click and you can delete the line and reestablish. So the difference here with this join is it's going to be more like a VLOOKUP. It's going to bring data together horizontally, whereas the union stacked all the data on top of one another. So the union would be like cutting the data from one sheet and pasting it below an existing sheet at the last row. The join is going to be like doing a bunch of VLOOKUPs. So we're going to add data onto the same line based on the values in a certain field. So like you would with the VLOOKUP. So in our case, in order to configure this join, what we want to do is we want to choose the field that links our data sets together. And that is currency. So where currency on the left equals currency on the right, we want to establish that join. Before I go on and actually, let's go ahead and let's click run. I'm going to have to go back and show you guys one thing. So when we click the run button here, the output anchors of the join, there's 3 of them. I talked about them during the demo, just as a refresher. I didn't talk as in depth as I would like. So the J is our joined records. Those are currencies that were in both of our files. If we had currencies in one file in our left file and not in the right, they would pop out here. And currencies in the right file, not in the left, would pop out here. So what you'll notice is we actually had a lot of currencies in our currency lookup file that we didn't have in our data set. So again, another great thing about the join tool versus, say, if I was doing this in Excel and a VLOOKUP, we're going to see what all those non-matched records are. Perhaps you're expecting 100% match. Well, this is an easy way to see, did we get 100% match or not? And if not, well, I've got my data isolated that didn't match. I can start another branch off of there. So one thing I noticed that I want to draw your attention to is, you see how the field type for all these currencies is a string? That means it's stored as text. You guys all know how we can change that, right? So let's actually, there's an embedded select inside this join. So what I want to do is, actually, I'm going to show you guys something different. I want to show you something cool that you might find interesting. If you guys can click on the preparation section with me. And let's drag an auto field. And what I'd like you to do is just drop it on the existing line in between the input and the join. So one nice thing that I think is kind of cool about Alteryx is even after you've built a process that's 10 steps, you can go back and change step 2, or you can add in a new step 2 by just dropping a tool on that existing line. So what this auto field tool is going to do is it's going to look at the data and it's going to choose the appropriate field type for us. So there's really nothing for else to do other than let's just click run together. And now if I go into the join, see those field types? They were a string, now they're a double. So that tells me that my my currency values are now stored as a number and not as as text or as a string, which is going to be important here in our next step. All right, guys, so 2 more quick steps here, and then as promised, we're going to stop for some Q&A. What I first want to do is I want to get everything to be a standardized standardized currency. So if you guys can do this with me, let's go up to the top here and let's drop in a formula. And let's add it after the J. And where it says select column, we're going to click to add a column. Your cursor is now in the place where you need to start typing. I'm going to add in profit underscore USD. It doesn't matter what you call this, if you call it something slightly different. But again, I'm just going to standardize this so that we're only looking in US dollars. And if I go now down below and click in my expression box, we want to multiply our profit times the exchange rate for US dollars. So if I go, I'm going to click on the X icon here for the columns and constants. And if I click on my profit, and I'm going to type in an asterisk for multiply. And now if I scroll down to USD, we're now multiplying our profit times our US dollars, and I will change my data type to a double. A double is just a number that contains decimals. All right, so let me click run again. And if I scroll all the way to the right, there's our profit in US dollars. All right, guys, very last step that we're going to do together here is, as I mentioned, we wanted to understand what is our profit by country and segment. So what I'm going to do now is let's click on the favorites together and let's drop in a summarize. So I'm going to go find my country field. If you click on country, click on add, and then click on group by. Now let's do the same for segment. Click on segment, click on add, click on group by. And then I'm going to go down to the very bottom, which is my profit. Click on profit, click on add, and click on sum. And very last time, we're going to click the run button together. Go ahead and click run. What we're now presented with is for each country, for each segment, the sum of the profit in a standardized view of the US dollars. The thing that we're not going to do together, but is worth mentioning, as you can see, we do have an output data where we can then send this data to Excel, or as mentioned earlier, Tableau, or a database, or you guys can reference the link that is in the chat that Kevin pasted in there for all the various data sources that we can output to. With that, hopefully this was a good introduction to building your first Alteryx workflow. Hopefully you guys have a good understanding of some of the tasks that can happen inside of Alteryx, ingesting multiple data sources, combining data, cleaning up messy data, creating new fields, aggregating data. We also talked about doing predictive models early on in the demo. So with that, thanks for your time and attention, and I will pass it back to Porter.
Can you guys hear me?
Sure can.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Jimmy. That was great. That was fantastic. Any questions? And if we can't hear you and you just want to put your question in the chat, that's cool too.
Hey, Porter, probably what I'll do is maybe unmute everyone so everyone has the ability to take themselves off of mute. And if there are any questions, we can handle it that way. Does that work?
That works great. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, stand by, everyone. You may be placed on off mute. And so if you are, go ahead and place yourself on mute unless you have a question.
Oh, we got a question. Can you skim through some of the other tools?
Yeah, sorry. I don't have the ball anymore, but let me just talk very briefly on some of the other tools and how you can get access to more information about it. So on some of those tools, whenever I clicked on them, it showed you, it said open example. So again, hopefully you guys have seen enough and are interested to download the trial and start to try it out yourself. Those open examples can show you exactly what those different tools can do. But there's yeah, there are a variety of things. I don't feel like we have enough time to go through all the individual tools and what they can do. But really, you know, any kind of manipulation that you'd want to do to your data, there's a combination of tools that we can use in order to solve that process, along with, as Porter mentioned at the beginning, you know, ways to do assisted modeling, machine learning, predictive capabilities, spatial analytics. There's a ton, and so yeah, I think that, you know, warrants, you know, let's have another conversation. Let's talk about what you're interested in and you know, what part of Alteryx can help solve that.
Another question is it possible to translate? Hang on one second, because my box just came up over top of my question. Is it possible to translate existing query workflows and accessed, and can it be pasted in SQL to Alteryx?
Yeah, that's a great one, and yes. So what we can do is I'd mentioned being able to consume Microsoft Access as well as different database tables, and yes, we can leverage existing queries. And a little bit behind the scenes, essentially what you would do is you would just drop that query in a configuration of an input data tool after you've connected to that source, and then it would push that query to the database so that you're now not returning the entire database table, but the result of a query.
Excellent. And I'm going to ask for questions to be given verbally now, because I just shared my screen, so I'll have a harder time monitoring the chat. So if you have a question and you're not afraid to ask it out loud, please do so. If there are no questions, I am going to give you guys a kind of call to action. So first of all, Jimmy, fantastic job. Thought the demo was great, and I loved the hands-on walkthrough. That was awesome. If you guys are new to Alteryx and this is the first time you're seeing it, definitely recommend that you download a free trial. You can go to the Alteryx website, just download Designer for 14 or 15 days. That'll give you access to everything that you were working with here today. If you have Alteryx, then I would recommend you also go out and check all the live training that we offer. Again, you can find it from our alteryx.com website /live training. It's a great place to go out and pick up some additional skills. Or if you just want to learn more or learn to build more business value through Alteryx, then you can sign up for a value consultation. There is a place to get to it from our website. As I hover over it, hopefully you can kind of see there where you go to. Just kind of a get started link off of the alteryx.com website. Again, I wanted to say thank you for all of the folks that have joined us today. We know 2 hours is a long period of time, especially in this world of virtual everything. So we appreciate it. And if we can be of any assistance, do not hesitate to reach out and call or email any of us. One quick question for maybe Maria, the content of this, will it be sent to folks afterwards, Maria?
Yeah, the session was recorded, so we'll be sending out the session, and I'm maybe Jimmy can answer whether or not the workflow will be saved and we can distribute that. But the session itself will go out as a recorded
Excellent.
To answer the question, yes, we can certainly send out the workflow. So for those that do download and want to play around with it, yeah, we'll send that out so you guys have access to it.
Well, thanks again, everybody. We really do appreciate your time. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you soon. Take care.